So in this one, let's think about our mileage program, right? Because that's what we're building, or something like that. Because keeping track of mileage is important, and keeping track of trip costs is important for folks. There's whole apps that are built out of these concepts. For me, I drive an electric vehicle, so wattage per mile is a thing that I pay attention to. How well am I driving? The more conscious I am of how I drive, the better my watts per mile, so miles per gallon, right? But in this case, let's think about what somebody'd want in an app. So probably, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to actually close the curly brace. I'm going to introduce the curly brace here because we're going to do a couple of things in this function. Okay. So first, let's do this. Let's say const, and let's call it mpg equal. Okay. So let's break this into two lines, and I'll show you why in a minute. So we're going to say const trip cost equal to mpg times price. Okay, so why would we want that? Because if I'm creating an app, I need to think about what the user wants. What do they want to have access to? You think about it for yourself when you're using an app, right? The more information, often the better. Depends on what you're trying to get from the app, of course. Depends on what the app's trying to accomplish. There are a lot of things that go into this, but in general, what we want to do is actually keep track of something, right? So in social media, we're keeping track of your friends. Well, okay, you could talk about if that's a good or a bad thing. You're keeping track of your likes, your dislikes, so that maybe we can give you content more along the lines of what you like. That's hopefully what it does. But regardless, any app you create is keeping track of something. And so in JavaScript, as a fundamental data structure, okay, and this is going to be important for us to understand, there is something called an array. Okay, so let's go up here and let's just go ahead and define it and then talk about it. Let's call it, in this case, const. Let's call it my, for now, array, ARRAY is, but I often like to abbreviate it like this, and we do open and close brackets. Okay, now these now we're moving on beyond primitives. What we've been talking about so far are primitive values. And now we're going to end up starting to talk about data structures in JavaScript. And data structures and almost everything, including functions, are actually, believe it or not, we haven't introduced it, we will soon, something called objects. Okay, so when we looked at primitives, and Todd did a nice job of talking about primitives, right? Primitive data types in JavaScript. Well, let's just go look at them real quick because I think it's worth, right? So string, number, boolean, undefined. Okay, so those are the primitive values in JavaScript. So if we go look at, just look, is this the right one? Data types. Yeah. So this is actually one of the pages he looked at, right? So you've used the type of, so those are great, right? Talked about immutable, right? So here we have, right, these primitive types, that types of data, but now we're going to move into an array, okay? So an array, in this case, is not one of the primitives. It ultimately ends up being an object, believe it or not. That's what I was saying before. So array, data, yeah, let's call it data type, right? JavaScript, just so you can see it. Okay, I know this is where, oh yeah, I don't like, I agree with Todd on this one. Although I think W3 School has gotten a lot better. Sorry, I just popped out of that real quick. Okay, so arrays are an object, but they're an array. And you're like, I haven't learned about objects, so what do we care about that, right? So here's my point. It's not a primitive, right? That aren't primitives. Arrays aren't primitive, and this becomes important, which we will talk about, passing by value and passing by reference, which we will do in a little bit. Well, not on this lecture, but soon. Okay, so if I set up my array, right, I could store anything in there. I could store, and this is where people who are used to strongly typed languages, again, they hate this, right? So I could give my name, I could give my age, right? I could give all kinds of different primitives inside of here. Okay, so let's just set that up for a second and go over here and look at it. Okay, let's go ahead and let it run. And by the way, this is the other thing is I'm going to take off that breakpoint because we've been playing with this code right here. And I'm going to set that breakpoint right here. And I'm going to refresh it because you can also set the breakpoints at the beginning of the file to see how JavaScript is processing your file or setting your file up. Because what it does is it takes a first pass where it goes through and it places in memory your function, your variable names, okay? And that becomes important too with value versus reference. But for this case, we're just going to run this line. We'll just stop it right there. Okay. So when it runs the line called set up a constant called myArray, we've opened and closed these brackets. We've given it two values in here. The question might be now, why? Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because we're keeping track of data, and this gives us a list ability. List ability, a list. Okay. So once I execute this line, okay, now, and right now, what it's doing is just going to go set up in memory, go through the file because I don't have a breakpoint anywhere else. There's nothing for it to do. But if I come down or if I scroll over here, I can see there's an array. There's two items in the array. The first item, okay, is, and this is where arrays, and if you've not heard this term, this can be confusing when you first hear it. Arrays, there's a position for each one. So the first position is 0, the second position is 1. So even though there's two items in here, right? It's the first position is 0, the second position is 1, and if we had a third position, that would be 2. And why you want to know that is those are the indexes. So if I wanted to say my array, okay, again, down here, but then I would want to actually say, show me the first item. Oh, okay. So how about the second item? Okay. Okay. How about in this case, the third item, but the second index? It's not there. Now, this is where you also learn to update these structures, which is awesome. And you learn about methods for how to update arrays, which is totally fun. And we're going to learn about, I think in the last video or the next section video here is how to loop through them because that's the most common thing you'd want to do. Okay. So that's just its basic understanding. So just start kind of getting that in your head. And there's just different ways we're going to deal with these. But in our app, how would we use this? Okay. How would we use this tracking? Let's get rid of this. Okay. We've set up an array. Okay. We've called mileage. We're updating the DOM with it. But how about in the mileage function? Now, we could also write a separate function in this for this, and you could start thinking about why you'd want to do this. But we could also do something like this. We could say my array dot push. Now push, actually let's just see it. And that way it kind of starts to make sense. I got MPG and trip cost. Okay. Okay. What's that going to do? So let's do this now as well. Let's actually call this more than one time. This time, let's say we did 12 gallons. We drove 320 miles and we paid a little less, $5 for gas. Okay, come back over here. We're going to say run this through. I have a breakpoint here. I'm going to set a breakpoint on this first call to update DOM. But remember, we're calling mileage first. All right, so let's walk through it. Let's step through it. Okay, mileage. Okay, now right now, my array, there's nothing in there. If I run this line, then what I have is my array has one item in it. Oh, dot push. Hold on, my bad. Oh no, it worked. It was actually, I was rolling over this whole array method thing. That's why I was like, why is it one in push? It's the way DevTools was showing it to me. But it did, in this case, if I go, right, I could roll over here. I could see, oh, okay, I have two things in the array, 0. So now how would I reference that, right? So if I did array, now I'm using the up arrow here, right? 3 is not in there. So how about 0? What would that be? 30, right? So miles per gallon is 30, right? And the cost which would be 1, okay, 162. Hmm. How does that feel? How does that make sense? So what we're doing is we're keeping track of something in our app. We're using a structure, a data structure in JavaScript called an array. Okay. It's indicated here. We're actually there's different ways to talk about how we're defining the array. We could set it up other than this, but for this purpose, this is just the easiest way to do it. Okay. And now, why would we not set up the array in here? Is because we want to run this code, right? We want to run our mileage program. And by the way, we should actually rename mileage, right? What is it really, right? How about let's name this keep or track MPG and cost. How about that? It's not the best name in the world, but when I do that, what do I have to update here, right? I got to update the same thing. Okay. So I have to track and I guarantee you after I finish this video, I'll go, I could have come up with a better name. But sometimes the hardest thing in programming is naming things. The second hardest thing is naming things. Okay. So it's just good to name functions what they're actually doing. And I think that just shows you first, you can name it anything you want, as long as you've stayed within the guidelines. Go track MPG and cost, miles per gallon and cost. Okay. And then in this case, we're tracking it because we're placing it in an array. Okay. Here's what I want on this one. Commit this code, right? Play around with it. I'm not going to make you, but the more you play around with something, but here's what I want you to tell me in your README file that I had you set up, right? So this is the second thing does this array concept make sense to you? Okay. We've just started it. We've introduced it. We've shown you the structure. Okay. We've shown you how to update it with just one method, right? There are many out there. Trust me. We're going to talk about. So entries, fill, filter, find. Oh my God. And when it says prototype like this, these are just methods. These are looping methods in here. So if we were to do look at push. So I think and this is where I really like the idea of taking what you've learned and learning more from it, right? So, look at shift. I'm actually talking myself now as I'm talking into making you actually do some coding on this. I was a little worried we were introducing it too quickly, but I don't think we are. It is really fun to play around with this stuff, right? So think about how could you change this? And I think I'll leave this video as this last one in this first assignment. So that's what I want you to do. And I'll update the code here is you've coded along with me. And now change the code that you've seen me write. And then I'll have you a commit message underneath here, right? But I want you to, and this is a good thing to do, is go to MDN, right? Look at some of these, see, shift is fun, right? Shift removes the first element. So the thing I'll teach you next is looping. That'll be our next major topic here, looping over so that we can loop over and do something with that data. And then of course, shift would say, why are you doing it? Splice, okay. Turns a shallow copy. So it splices it, right? From start to finish. And it does just that. And what's cool about this, the examples are really good, right? You can look at sort. Sorry, that was not splice. Slice. And there is a splice one in there as well. There's actually two. Reverse. Reverse is fun, right? But just kind of play around. Now, get working code, right? That's the important thing. Because I think as I'm talking about it, and this is one of the, right, is I almost want you to push working code and then play around with it. I think that's what I'll end up doing. But for this one, I'm not going to be as particular. More than anything, I just want you to see me write code, start to understand what that code's doing, use dev tools, and then write some code on your own. Okay, so this will be the last one. What you'll do here is commit. Give me your commits here so that I can see the work that you've done in following along with these videos. I hope this helps you out, and I'll start the next assignment in week 7.